We are live. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting, and I'd like to welcome our guest this evening, Dr. Elizabeth McDonald. How are you, Elizabeth?
I'm doing well. How are you, David?
I'm good too. Tell us where you are in the world. I know where you are, but tell everyone else.
I'm in Seneca, South Carolina, where it's everything's going well. It's 80 degrees, so it's nice and cool compared to the hot weeks that we've been having. So, enjoying the weather right now.
You said 80 degrees?
80, yes.
Oh my goodness. I'm in San Antonio, and today is 106 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
met people who say, "How can you stand the heat?" And my answer is, I live in an air conditioned house. I go to an air conditioned car. I go to an air conditioned building, so we're not in the heat on an extended basis, because we don't necessarily work in the heat.
It gets
Well,
that hot in
thank you
some
for being
places,
here.
but I'll stay here.
And it's my pleasure to introduce you. Elizabeth Macaulay McDonald, PhD, is Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Instruction for the School District of Oconee County, Walhalla, South Carolina. Dr. McDonald is in her 13th year in education and has experience serving in various roles from secondary social studies teacher, assistant principal, elementary school principal, and middle school principal before becoming an assistant superintendent. As a teacher, she was recognized in 2018 as District Teacher of the Year for Clarendon School District 2. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Secondary Social Studies from Clemson University, a master's in education from Anderson University, a master's in educational leadership from the University of South Carolina, a doctorate in literacy, language, and culture from Clemson University, and an educational specialist degree in leadership from Clemson University. My goodness, that's very impressive. You're someone who likes school.
I do. I think I have a addiction to learning. I love it.
Uh-huh. Is your head about to explode with all the knowledge you have?
Not quite. I think I still have a little more space in there. Maybe
You
not
have
for
a
another
little bit more
degree,
space
but
in there.
always for the learning.
And you still have a close relationship with Clemson.
I do. I do. They're right up the road from where I'm located. And
Hmm.
then a lot of my professors are still there. So it's good to stay connected. And it's my alma mater, started
Hmm.
there, ended there.
Well,
So,
tell us a little bit about your dissertation.
yeah. My dissertation revolved around Black oral histories as a culturally sustaining practice in social studies classrooms. So I really just looked at what does it look like when you bring in Black community elders into the classroom, allow them to tell the stories that are not in the textbook, that really, giving students the opportunity to ask questions of community members based on what they know and what they've learned in their classroom, being able to compare that and contrast that learning. I mean, it was really amazing experience for students to be engaged, lean in, and just learn more about their community and make connections with their community members.
So, when you say make connections with your community, you mean that you would have community members come and speak with them?
Yes. So
Okay.
the students developed questions based on the unit of study that we were in. Those community members came in, the students interviewed those community members and got to have some really good dialogue. The important part about bringing those community members in was that this school was in a very rural area, high poverty. So making sure every student had access and the ability to ask questions of somebody
Hmm.
without having to feel like they couldn't complete the assignment or couldn't participate, bringing them in was just a great way to really make that experience full circle for students.
Now, what was the observable effect of this work of having community people serve as oral historians?
Mhm. Well, we really just saw a high level of student engagement. We live in the age of cell phones and kids being glued to those. And other days when was in the classroom, you saw students engaged on their phone. But when these community members were in, students were leaned in, phones were down. They were asking questions that they didn't already have previously written down. The community members were asking them questions. They were making connections like, oh, that's how it used to be.
Oh.
And so then even after they left, they're like, this is really fun. Can we do it again? Um, they really just took something meaningful from that experience.
And you're planning on using some of the material you found in your dissertation research as journal articles.
That's what I'm working on, trying to get my writing hands back under me and get that done, because I really want to share my research with others in the education field, specifically with social studies teachers,
Uh-huh.
just so they can see that this is an avenue, something that they could do in their classroom to make
Uh-huh.
learning come to life and make it meaningful and relevant for their students.
Well, Elizabeth, it's great having you here. The topic of our conversation this evening is let's talk about it, direct instruction. And we have 3 subtopics or 3 bullets. What is direct instruction? Why has direct instruction become a dirty word? And explicit direct instruction as one tool in a teacher's toolbox. Well, where shall we begin, ma'am?
I think from the top.
Okay, let's go right to the top. What is direct instruction?
Yeah. Direct instructions, just whenever a teacher is explicitly delivering content to students, when we're not hiding the ball, we're leading them through the process of learning, right? So we're telling them what it is, we're helping them understand, and then we're also coming around with assessment to make sure that they've actually learned the material. So it's really just a walking through of learning with students.
Well, some people might say that's an antiquated way of teaching. How do you respond to them?
And that's why it's become a dirty word, right?
Go ahead.
But the thing is, I think a lot of folks, whenever they view direct instruction, they think about the teacher at the front of the room leading a class and just plugging forward. I think about Ferris Bueller's Day Off and the teacher's up there, Bueller, nobody's paying attention, or Charlie Brown with the womp, 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 right? But it's really not, it doesn't have to just be that, right? Like, you can break it apart, and in best case scenario, you're pairing direct instruction with another effective method. Direct instruction is really just a leading process. It doesn't have to only be lecture, but lecture is just one mode that you could see in the classroom.
Okay. See, here's a picture that came into my head. Direct instruction, teacher is lecturing, and if you didn't get it, I got a ruler. I'm going to help you hear or pay attention to what I'm doing. So is that a picture that you have had to clarify for people?
Definitely, right? Because it looks different, and you have to be responsive. You have to look at how you're formatively assessing if students are with you, right? If they understand. And so whenever you think about direct instruction, and you could go to the model of I do, we do, you do, right?
Right.
Where you're leading them through the learning, you're doing something together. They have some chances for independent practice. But really just looking at how do we make sure students know in the moment. And so having those formative assessment pieces are really important so that you know where students are and how to respond, how to pivot in the moment if needed.
So then how would teachers know where students are? By their facial expressions, by questioning? Which ways would teachers know that they're connecting with those students and students are understanding?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have that qualitative feedback, right? Where it looks like they're all with you, but you can't rely on that, because some kids will look at you and smile and they'll nod and they have no clue what you're talking about, right? So that's when teachers have to utilize all of the tools in their toolbox when they're looking at maybe an exit slip. Maybe you're doing some thumbs up, thumbs down, depending on, who you're with and where you are. Maybe you have some preloaded Quizlets or quizzes or any other type of program that you can utilize for in the moment feedback for students.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're having them do some turn and talks, listening to those discussions as you're walking around and observing. So there's lots of ways to get that feedback in a meaningful way,
Mm-hmm.
and not just you got it or you don't. Here's my ruler, right?
Okay, yeah. All right, so you just implied using technology. So tell us how technology and direct instruction fit together.
Yeah. You can embed technology anyway in any classroom. I think one of the things that we found, or at least in my own experiences that I found, is sometimes we augment our use of technology in the classroom and don't necessarily rely on our own expertise and experiences that we can bring. And so you have to be very mindful whenever you use technology. Are you using it to reinforce something or to introduce a concept? But then how are we also still engaging with students and
Mm-hmm.
engaging with children to make sure that learning is occurring? But like I said just a second ago, you could use it as a formative check. So maybe you have a quiz that's online, or maybe you have a quick little Padlet where students are typing their response to a question that you're giving full group so you can get some quick feedback. So there's various ways to engage with technology, but also just keeping in the center the fact that the teacher is the teacher, and that's our mode for getting students the information.
Would you say that direct instruction is more appropriate for certain grade levels than others?
I think it's appropriate for all grade levels,
Explain,
right?
please.
Yeah. Well, whenever you're thinking about the littles, you're thinking about elementary
Right,
school specifically. Those kids don't have prior learning experiences. And so
right.
being able to make sure they have a strong foundation, it's going to be very important to explicitly let them know how we do, what the process is, what the procedure is, how do we think through this thing. When you get to middle and high school, even though they have those basic foundational skills, a lot of times if it's new knowledge, specifically content specific, once you start getting in the middle and high school, you know, they need to have a nice strong basis before we send them off into a world of problem-based learning or project-based learning or blended learning or inquiry learning. They have to have something to anchor on to. Otherwise, they're just kind of floating out there. So I think it has a space and a place at all levels.
Elizabeth, you just opened the door to all of those various pedagogical approaches. So, would you differentiate direct instruction from the others that you listed, project based, or even we call it flipped classrooms things? So how do we differentiate direct instruction from those other approaches?
Yeah. Well, with project-based learning, kids typically there's a problem that they've centered on and they're trying to learn more. And through that process, they create a way to try to solve that problem, right? But they're tasked with figuring things out. And so in that process, they're having to learn about just different subjects, different things in order to be able to solve the problem. Whenever you're looking at blended learning, you're looking at utilizing technology in the classroom so that you have a nice healthy mix, hopefully, of teacher voice, student voice, and technology. If you're looking at, inquiry based learning, that's when you're really just diving in. You have, again, a question, you're researching, you're trying to figure things out. You also have personalized learning, right? Where you're looking at student interests and trying to pull learning through that lens. So there's lots of different ways to approach learning, but direct instruction should still be a piece of whatever it is we're doing
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not just left out in the rain, so that we have kids a place that they can come home to. That's how I think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Direct instruction gives students the knowledge they need to have a home base. So
Mm-hmm.
before they dive into inquiry, before they dive into project based, before they dive into blended, they at least have a foundation that's been set of common knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
common things you're expecting them to know, and then they go out and build off of that.
Mm-hmm. Now we talk about differentiated learning, and with hope there's research to support all these different approaches. What do the research tell us about direct instruction?
Yeah. Well, if you look at John Hattie's work, the effect size for that, I can't quote it for you right now, but it's a pretty significant amount, effect size of just the impact of direct instruction on student learning. It's a very effective method to get students the information. And I think it's because you're not hiding anything from a child. You're truly leading them through the process of understanding, learning, helping them understand thinking and the ways to think, ways to question, and you're leading them through that process.
Well, if direct instruction is so effective, how in the world did it become a dirty word?
Yeah, I think it's because of the view people have of it, right? And the way that a lot of people have utilized it. So in a lot of classrooms, you ended up with teachers just, and this is no judgment, but you end up with folks in front of the students just talking for an entire 90-minute period, right? Not really seeing students engaged or students that are having communication back and forth with the teacher. And so the opposite of that is to turn it over to the kids, right? And let them engage in learning and inquiry and trying to figure things out. But then somewhere in the middle is this balance, right? Where teachers are guiding the train and students are able to decide how I'm learning, how I'm engaging, what's best for me. And of course, for every class that you have, different students that you have, there's different needs. So even knowing what that balance should look like in your classroom
Mhm.
varies.
Um, in our earlier conversation before we went live, we talked about other work that you do in the consultancy you have and the professional development that you provide to others. And I said to you, my goodness, what you're suggesting is organizational change, organizational transformation. If you're introducing direct instruction or introducing other kinds of approaches, how do you get people to change?
Right. And that really comes through having conversations with people, right? Talking about data, talking about what our strengths are, how do we get better, and being coming from a place of we're all in this together, right? So if the data's showing us that what we're doing right now isn't working, we've got to try something new. What can we try? And so coming to the table open handed. One of my colleagues likes to use that phrase, and I think I've kind of adopted it. But coming to the table open handed, that we're all in this together. How do we move forward? I can suggest various things, but it's not going to be until somebody else accepts this, right? Or they see it in practice and see that I can do this, that it's really going to move forward. So I think being able to come to the table, come with the reasons why we need to think about a change, right? Or a shift in what we're doing.
Mhm.
And then being willing to listen and engage in learning alongside folks.
Mhm. Now, earlier you had mentioned your team. Do you use instructional coaches?
Yeah. Our district does have a reading coach at each of our elementary schools, and we have instructional coaches at each of our middle schools. So we do have that frame out there as a way to help support teachers as they're learning new things, trying new things, and to better serve students.
Okay. Yeah. In my experience, in my walk through this profession, I've seen how administration changed, where administrators at one point were responsible for running schools, and then another point we became instructional leaders.
Mhm.
You have been an administrator, you've been a principal at various levels, you've been a classroom teacher. How do you
Right.
view yourself? Are you the management person or the instructional leader?
Yeah. Are you talking in the right now or the before when I was leading a school?
Putting it all together.
Putting it all together.
Mhm.
Well, I think my title is instructional leader right now, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, there's some other folks on the other side of our building that deal with operations. So,
Uh-huh.
uh, so truly for me, I get to really dream about what can be and um, also dream about what is and how do we, uplift what is and really celebrate the things that we're doing really, really well
Mhm.
and how do we highlight those strengths in those areas where we can continue to keep doing well by kids,
Mhm.
but also again getting to dream about what could be uh, and a lot of those dreams you kind of hold tight because I've known that now in the role that I'm in now, whenever I say things, it has a a big impact apparently as assistant superintendent. So some of those dreams I kind of hold on to, but you think about ways that we can just better serve students because that's what we're here for each and every day.
Could you say more about why direct instruction is considered a dirty word?
Yeah. I think just because of the connotation that comes along with it, right? The idea that we're not being responsive to what students need, the idea that there is just the sage on the stage, or it's just kids sitting there learning, memorizing facts, and you're just having to do some basic level skills. And so, in the midst of, I think it really started to happen a little bit prior to COVID, right? Where we really started to see the shift and the popping up of inquiry and project based and blended and flipped and all of these things really started to take over once COVID came because that was how we got through it, right? We really focused on technology. And so now we're starting to see this pivot where folks are recognizing that maybe there's another way we can do this. Maybe directly telling kids what we need them to know isn't the worst thing, right? Like leading them through the process of learning. Maybe there's something to that again. But I think it was just the pivot away from it right before COVID. Folks just started thinking we're not getting kids involved, we're not giving them autonomy, voice, and choice in their learning in this way. And so I think in that way, it really moved folks to think, direct instruction is not great. It's not a good thing.
In your doctoral program, you studied literacy, language, and culture. And then, of course, you were a social studies teacher. I would assume that as a social studies teacher, you spent time speaking about various cultures throughout the world.
Yeah.
How does cultural competence fit together with direct instruction?
Yeah, I think being responsive to the learning needs that are in your classroom, knowing historical ways of knowing of various groups. Today we were actually with our induction teachers, and we were talking about choral responses and responding back in that way where the whole class repeats after you and you say something and then they say something. And I just mentioned in a flyby, hey, historically in Black communities, underrepresented communities, communities of poverty, this is actually something that has been utilized as a historical way of learning things, right? You see it in the Black church where the pastor says something, then everybody responds, and the pastor says
Call and
something,
response.
call and response. And so it's really just something that's been embedded in this culture, and it's a technique that you could utilize that really resonates with the student group. And that's research based, right? Like that's a research based practice.
Could you give another example? That was a very good example of how culture will affect instruction in the classroom. Could you give another example? Let's say a different cultural group.
Yeah. If you think about indigenous cultures, right? Just like in Black culture, storytelling is really important to them. So creating space in your classroom for students to connect, to collaborate, to talk with each other, to share their learning with each other, and to talk about their own experiences. That's going to be very meaningful for them. And a lot of cultures have really strong language and linguistic heritages that if we can honor that in the classroom space, give students a time to have some true discourse, right? Talk about their learning. It really helps them understand concepts and helps them grow.
Very good. That was very informative. Thank you for answering a question like that. Well, our last bullet is explicit direct instruction as one tool in a teacher's toolbox. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just this idea that direct instruction is one of the things that we do. It's not the only thing, right? So you're still going to have blended learning. You're still going to have project-based learning, inquiry learning, but there are going to be some subjects, some topics where direct instruction needs to be the thing that you pull out of your toolbox to use. So really for teachers to look at their standards, to know what's being taught, how am I assessing this, and which tool helps me get my students there in the most effective and efficient way, right? Because we only have 180 days with them. And some of those days we know are testing days. Some of those days are various celebrations and things like that. So for teachers to know, I have this in my toolbox, when is the most effective time for me to use it? Right? And not forget about it and not feel like it's horrible for them to do it.
The most effective time. What would be the most effective time? If I'm a teacher listening to this conversation right now and I'm saying, okay, I suppose I could use direct instruction, but when would be the most effective time to use it?
Yeah, David, I think that's a really complicated question, right? Because for different subjects, it's going to be different, right? So in a U.S. history lesson, I would imagine if they've never talked about the foundations of government, you might want to just tell them that versus them trying to figure out what that means, right? But in a math class, I think about at an elementary school, you probably don't want kids to just figure out how to add things together. You want to show them how to add. And then later on, maybe you have some, phenomenon based things where you're hiding certain numbers under cups. And so they're manipulating, things and different things like that. But there's going to be different times and different places for every subject, every content area, every grade level. And that's when we have to really lean in as teachers, as educators, and think about what practice would best allow me to teach this to students for them to understand.
Earlier,
So
I'm sorry. Well, you You're doing wonderfully. Thank you. Earlier, you mentioned formative assessments. Could you speak more about how formative assessments fit together with direct instruction?
Mhm. Really, it just allows you to know what the students know, right? So I've taught this. Do they understand it? Do I need to reteach it? Do I need to try something different, teach it in a different way? And so, in that way, I think formative assessment in general is just a great tool to know whether your mode of teaching is effective. Because you may find that direct instruction for that unit really didn't work out, and I need to pivot and try something different, right? So it gives you some real time data to let you know whether we're on the train or we're off the train, and what we can do to get every kid on and get them learning at high levels.
What would be some examples of formative assessments that teachers could use in the classrooms?
Mhm. So, kind of like I mentioned earlier, right? Like you could do thumbs up, thumbs down. You could do a quick write where students write about what they've learned or a question that you're posing to them. You
Mhm.
could have them do a turn and talk. You could have them do a think, pair, share where you're going to hear out some of the things that they're talking about. You could have them do an exit ticket that they leave in the parking lot on their way out the door. You can go around with your checklist, right? And you have them doing a task and you're seeing how they're doing, and as they show you mastery, you can check it off. They've got it done. You know that they're in a good space. They understand. So really, there's lots of ways that you can formatively assess your students in real time to get some good feedback.
I suppose you observe a lot of teachers in classrooms, a lot of classroom observation.
Yes, and I love it. I love it. We have some amazing teachers in Oconee.
Uh-huh. Now, do you have a tool that you use to summarize or point out what the teachers are doing in their classrooms for further discussion?
We do. We have an observation instrument that we use in our district that we've shared with principals, and we asked our principals to share it with teachers so they know what we're writing on whenever we're in there, what we're looking for when we're in there. And we really give that feedback mainly to the principals. And then I like to follow up with the teachers with the email with the cool things that I'm seeing going on in their classrooms.
Hmm. And I would assume this observation instrument has a space for direct instruction.
It does. It has, there's an instruction box, and we can write down the things that we're seeing.
All right, cool, cool. Well, Elizabeth, we've discussed direct instruction in great depth and touched a lot of topics, a broad range of topics. And there might just be too much for us to all grasp at once. So, what would be a takeaway that you would want people to have from our conversation?
I think my takeaway, or what I'd want for folks to take away from our
Mhm.
conversation, is just to remember the joy of getting in front of a classroom and showing them what they need to know. Uh, to me, that's where the magic happens in a class when students are interacting with their teachers. Teachers are guiding students through learning, and we're all just engaged together in real time. And so I think just remembering that uh, teaching is a powerful tool, right? Teaching in and of itself is a powerful profession. And that whenever we have a moment to be in front of kids with kids, not hiding the mark from them and just telling them what they need to know, that's not something we should ever forget as something that's a part of what we do every day.
Mhm. And what will be your call to action? What do you want people to do?
What do I want people to do? Well, I think I just want people to, just engage with kids. Engage with kids. In the day of technology and just the world that we live in, where kids have that from the moment they wake up to the time they go to sleep. Don't
Mhm.
be afraid to close those things down, right?
Mhm.
Close those computers down, close those phones, and just get in there with students. Do some of those high leverage strategies and practices that you learned about in college. Um, that we learned about in PD, and just do it, right? Just do it. Just teach.
And if people want to know more, how do they contact you?
Yeah, if folks want to know more, they can find me on LinkedIn, Elizabeth McDonald, or they could reach out via email. And it's real simple, elizabeth.em.mcdonald@gmail.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you for being our guest tonight. Elizabeth McCauley McDonald, PhD, is Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Instruction for the School District of Oconee County, Walhalla, South Carolina. Thank you for being our guest this evening. And I
Thank you for
wish
having
you
me.
all a wonderful evening and see you the next time we're broadcasting live.